Hello there, very good evening. Welcome to another edition of Face the Nation. We have gotten used to living on this planet like we have another planet to move to. But unfortunately, there is no plan B because there is no planet B. And this is going to be the basis of our discussion here on Face the Nation today. Amidst the economic crisis, amidst the impending presidential election that is due to be held in November, what is missing in the spotlight is what's happening to Sri Lanka's environment, specifically one of our most valuable resources, which is our oceans. And it's a known fact that Sri Lanka's oceans are in peril. And here at Newsfirst, we have revealed to the general public the magnitude of the destruction that is taking place in the oceans of Sri Lanka as and when they happen. And we decided that despite the buzz surrounding the presidential election and also the issues of the general public with regard as far as the economic crisis is concerned, it's also of paramount importance that we pay attention to the destruction of Sri Lanka's ocean, and more importantly, how we can save it. And for that, of course, we've got an expert panel on Face the Nation today, as we do always. Starting off, we've got Daniel Fernando. He is the Director of Blue Resource Trust. Thank you very much, Daniel, for joining us on our program this evening. We've also got Jayantha Vijay-Singha, a conservationist. Thank you very much, Jayantha, for joining us on our program. We've also got joining us here today on Face the Nation, Mudita Katuwala, the coordinator of Peril Protectors. Thank you very much, Mudita, for joining us on our program today. And last and certainly not least, no stranger to Face the Nation, we've got Dr. Dan Malika. He's an expert in the law of the sea. Thank you very much, Dr. Dan, for joining us on our program here today. So starting off with Daniel. Daniel, we speak a lot about conserving our ocean, protecting our ocean, preserving it for future generations and ensuring that future generations can also benefit from our oceans. When I say we talk about it, there's a lot of talk going on there. But the general impression, of course, among the general public and with what we see is happening, not only here in Sri Lanka, but in many countries across the world, but maybe some other countries, some developed countries must be doing a little bit more than what's happening here in Sri Lanka. As far as implementation goes, Sri Lanka does not have a good track record. So just to set the stage today in finding solutions to the destruction that is taking place in our oceans, how do you think we should bridge this gap between what we speak on conservation and what we actually do to conserve?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And first of all, thanks for having me here. I think what you raise is quite important, and it's probably an issue that as individuals on this planet we often find difficult to comprehend. As humans, we of course spend much of our life on land itself. We don't really spend much time on the ocean, let alone underwater. Much of our oceans are still, undiscovered. We have barely, touched the surface of it, to say the least. And unfortunately, our exposure to the ocean has mostly been focused on exploitation of natural resources that we find in our waters. So as humans, we have gone into the ocean for the very first time, mostly for the purpose or the intention of fishing, for our food. And that has then evolved into this large fishery industry, focusing on, economic growth of certain countries, but also food security. And I think we really need to look at the oceans in a very different way going forward. We need to understand that this is still, one of the last wild spaces that we have on our planet, and it is not an infinite resource as we probably thought. Everything that we are harvesting from the oceans, going from all of the fishery resources, down to even minerals and all of that that's found in our oceans, has a limit. It's not an infinite resource, even though the ocean is so vast. And I think focusing on sustainability is something that we should really be looking towards. We have to be controlling how we are interacting with all of these resources that we have out there. And yeah, I think taking a step back and really appreciating the ocean for what it is and not just exploiting it.
But Daniel, how do you really bridge the gap between, you know, what we discuss as policy now? You are in the business of coming up with policies and interacting with government agencies. How do you really bridge that gap? Is there an answer to the question?
It's a very challenging one, but I think if you look at where we are now, the fact that we are all here on this panel discussing oceans has shown that we have already taken a big step forward. We are recognizing that the oceans are in peril, as you pointed out. And we're having a lot of policymakers across the world now discussing the oceans. There are new treaties coming about, for example, the High Seas Treaty, which is quite relevant for much of our marine resources beyond the territorial and the exclusive economic zones of each country. So the oceans are most certainly at the forefront of many discussions, both among general public, but also among policymakers. And I think this shift that we're seeing is what really gives, well, at least me, quite a lot of hope, because we are having these conversations taking place. I think, as you pointed out, there's still, quite a gap that we have to bridge, and it will take some time to get there. Countries like Sri Lanka, we have, of course, had a big disadvantage, when we consider the civil war, because for about 30 years, the ocean was not very accessible to us. As researchers, we were not able to, go out on the water and conduct research. So we're definitely a little behind many other countries, but there has been a lot of progress made, I would say, in the last decade or so to recognize the importance of our oceans and the work that needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Daniel Fernando, Director of Blue Resources Trust. We'll continue our discussion on those lines in the next round, of course. I now move my attention to Jayantha Vijay Singha, a conservationist. Now, Jayantha, when we speak about conservationists and the work that you do, of course, it's extremely important. There have been numerous cases where conservationists have taken up matters, even at the highest level, as far as the Supreme Court goes. Even recently, there were several decisions that came out with regard to wild elephants being kept in custody. And these are very high-profile cases filed in the public interest for the benefit of the general public of Sri Lanka and, of course, our environment. Among conservationists, Jayantha, since you work in close proximity with all of them, since you're a conservationist yourself, do you think that there is equal interest in conserving the ocean as much as conservationists look at conserving maybe resources on the land, minerals, animals, trees? Or is there a bit of a imbalance on the scales here in Sri Lanka?
Once again, thank you so much having us today and talking about this very, very important topic. And this question is far more apparent for this discussion to begin with. Like the problem Daniel pointed out, we don't go to the ocean every single day like we do in the terrestrial ecosystems that we see our forests, we see our wetlands, we see our rivers, we see our mountains, and we see our lowlands and paddylands and all of that. We can see what is happening on the land anytime. We have a 22 million of a population if we take Sri Lanka, and we look at what's going on, and somebody somewhere is going to report it to somebody. But in the case of oceans, we hardly go to the ocean. Probably to coastal areas and shallow waters, but beyond that we don't get to go. So because of that, we do not know what's going on there. That's the number one, the main issue that we have. Because we don't know what's going on there, it's very difficult for a lot of people to get involved. Like in the case of research now, in the case of what Daniel and his team is doing, there has to be some concrete information and details that we should have to work on. So based on that information, we should be able to take whatever action necessary. And on the other hand, the problem is that we don't see what's going in the ocean so fast as we see in a terrestrial ecosystem. Today, a forest burned down or cut down, we're going to see it today itself or tomorrow. But what's going in the ocean may not be visible for us for a long, long time. So these are probably the main issues that while I agree with your statement that there won't be as much as interest from the public and even from the environmental circles on the ocean. On the other hand, what I also find is that that this marine ecosystems are far more complex, and the fact that what we know about it is very limited, and that is why this time the theme of the World Ocean Day is like discovering new heights, if not like exploring about the ocean, because we know only about 1/10 of the ocean, as the scientists say. So in general, public interest litigation and public interest in terms of terrestrial ecosystems are far high, but on the marine ecosystems are quite low, apart from those who are actually directly and involved in it for a long time. I think that is basically a big gap we have if we need to work on marine conservation in the future.
Thank you very much, Jayantha Vijay Singha, a conservationist. I now move my attention to Mudita, the coordinator of the Pearl Protectors. Now, Mudita, I personally know that Pearl Protectors have come forward and made several revelations as far as the damage to the ocean is concerned. We sometimes contact your organization for information on these incidents that are taking place here in Sri Lanka. As far as now, we spoke about the interest of the general public, we spoke about the interest of conservationists in the ocean, and we kind of came to an agreement that there is a little less interest because we don't really know what's going on. To put it very simply, out of sight, out of mind. Do you think the government of Sri Lanka is also following a similar pattern or a similar approach as far as the ocean is concerned? But only thing is, the government ought to know the importance of the ocean. They have the resources, they have the information, they have the means of obtaining the information and giving the priority that the oceans should be given. But is it being given that priority?
Well, that's a tough question. Thank you for having me here. Yes, of course, like we talked about the general public, creating awareness, but I think end of the day, it's about the policies also that matters. Sri Lanka is very unique when it comes to our marine environment. Our island, the sea around our island, it's about 20 times bigger, larger than the island itself. We have 1,500 kilometers of coastline. Along with that, we have so many marine species found in our seas. We have 5 out of 7 species of sea turtles coming in. It's a hotspot when it comes to marine biodiversity. Sri Lanka's economy is also depending on the ocean. Our monsoons is also depending on the ocean, the weather patterns, the rain that we get, the oxygen that we breathe. There's about 30% of our population is on the coastal stretch, which means there's many industries that are surviving thanks to the ocean. So it is high time that Sri Lanka takes conserving and protecting this unique marine environment seriously. To answer your question, I want to say Sri Lanka has gone through a lot of challenges. Recently, we saw the economic crisis, but yet we have failed to really understand how we can sustainably harness these benefits the ocean provides to us. Whenever we talk about fisheries, the main objective is to see every year how do we increase the catch without seeing how we can sustainably conduct these things. But we also see so many challenges like climate change. Really, we saw the heat wave just during the last 2-3 months, and we expect most of our corals to have been bleached because of it. We see illegal fishing practices, unethical fishing practices. We see coastal construction. We also see pollution, not just plastic pollution, but chemical pollution. So it's important as the government to really understand how much of benefits Sri Lankans are harnessing thanks to the ocean. And I believe at different levels, it is being taken seriously, but there are so many gaps in place, coordination between agencies. We see, simple issues like MV Express Pearl disaster. We saw how much of there was a lack of the interdepartmental coordination, and that led to so many other problems. So this is very important. It's very important that we really build up on really having a better policy in place, a national policy framework towards really conserving the ocean. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Muditha. We will get into more detail on those matters as we progress on Face the Nation. Finally, we've got Dr. Dan Malika, an expert in the law of sea. Dr. Dan, Muditha mentioned about the Express Pearl incident. So my first question to you, of course, is going to be a little bit more specific, because here in Sri Lanka, they say, there's a popular saying that time heals all wounds, but in at least in the Sri Lankan context, it's time covers up all mistakes. And as far as the Express Pearl incident goes, at the time that it happened, everybody was talking about it. People were just taken aback by the kind of impact that it has had. It was identified as one of the worst ocean disasters, man-made at least, across the entire world. But now nobody seems to be interested in it. It seems to be like just a talking point that some people just randomly bring up. The most recent of those incidents being the Minister of Justice, no less, alleging that there has been some sort of bribery as far as the filing of this action in Singapore goes. So what's really happening here?
In fact, Shalan, these kinds of situations do occur in the sea, and we know that the sea as a whole now considered as a blue economy, because there are various kinds of activities that are happening. It's not only the resources, it's also the shipping field, and a lot of economic benefits are being brought to every state, whether it's coastal or non-coastal. So the world is looking at a blue economy now as a whole. And unfortunately, we had a situation that was connected to the ship incident that you said. And it's no strange in the world of shipping, because these kinds of incidents do happen. But however, the steps that are taken by the relevant countries or the relevant port states that we call, or the coastal states, in protecting their marine environment is very important. Because marine environment is not only the marine resources per se, but it includes all kinds of resources that are connected, interconnected, and even not connected to the marine environment. Because if you look at the definition provided in the Law of the Sea Convention, a marine environment has a wide definition that has been provided therein. So it covers a whole spectrum of activities, a whole spectrum of things that are connected to the coast and the sea, as well as the interiors of the coastal states and the other countries in this world. Now, if you look at the Pacific Ocean itself, the Pacific Ocean is much larger than all the continents got together. If you take all the continents together, all the continents would make up something even lesser than the Pacific Ocean. So this is the kind of importance that the oceans have in our world, in our societies, and everywhere we see this. The blue economic prospects are very important to be safeguarded for the future of the world. And if you compare the incidents that happened in Sri Lanka with regard to MT New Diamond, MV Express Pearl, there are so many other incidents that have taken place in the other parts of the world. And some countries have really, especially the United Kingdom, United States, and France, and like that, they have taken stringent actions in relation to the particular incidents that have took place. Now look at the incident that happened in America, that collapsed the
Baltimore Bridge.
The Baltimore Bridge, where the vessel, the container vessel Dali was involved, and United States promptly took measures in avoiding such a, not only an incident, but also to make sure that the compensation are being duly channeled to the respective liable parties. Now, the question here in Sri Lanka with the incidents that you mentioned is that has our authorities taken such measures at the right time not only in preventing the damage, but also the damage that has occurred to the country, and what have our country's authorities taken in relation to obtaining of the compensation, imposing the liabilities on the owner. So these are all questions for us because, having all the experts, as all these gentlemen were telling or speaking rather, on various areas of coastal and marine resources, having all these experts, have we taken the advisors, have we taken the right way, have we taken the correct path to obtain the compensation that for which we have suffered in these incidents?
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan Malikar, an expert in the law of the sea. I now open the floor for questions, of course, from our journalists present here today. No stranger to the show, Nadim Majid. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Shalin. Dr. Dan, I'd actually like to start with you regarding the New Diamond incident and also the Express Pearl incident. When you look at the actions that the Sri Lankan authorities have taken, whether it's the lawyers at the Attorney General's Department or law enforcement, the failure so far, thus far, to secure compensation, the compensation due to the country, does that stem from a lack of capacity or a lack of will?
It's actually the failures that were associated in taking the necessary measures at the correct time or the right time, Because, you can go for cases, and the cases are lying at the moment. I don't want to talk about these cases because, these are sub judice. But however, when incidents occur like this, there are not only the legal steps that have to be taken. First of all, you need to take up the measures to prevent damage being occurred, the measures that are connected to the preventive side of it, and to restrict further damage being occurred. So all these are connected steps that the authorities should take up. So as I mentioned earlier, comparatively in other countries, in the developed countries, they are much more strict in terms in taking up the measures because they have the proper contingency plans in order and they know what to do and where to go. And so we do have some contingency plans, but however,
is there a lack of capacity among the officials who are in government?
Exactly, it is a lack of capacity. Not only the lack of capacity, but as I told before, there are so much of experts in various areas in this entire maritime and ocean sectors, but none of their expert opinions are being taken, right? Only I have seen this, that only few are working with it rather than going to other experts and taking their knowledge. And in Sri Lanka, we do have experts in various areas of maritime and ocean related fields. Like they have studied abroad, they have conducted their research and they're having masters and doctorates. We have the people with the capacity. The problem here is such capacitated people are not being taken use of.
Daniel, on that note, actually, I'd like to come to you now. You informed me earlier that you set up the Blue Resources Trust primarily as a research organization in Calcutta. in 2016.
Yes.
Right. In that time, what has your interaction with the state been like? How would you assess it?
Yeah, well, first of all, to clarify, I'm one of the 2 co-founders of Blue Resources Trust. And yeah, our primary focus is on research, but we also do quite a lot of policy work with various government agencies. And actually, we have had a relatively good interaction and relationship with a lot of different government departments in the country.
What are the main departments that you work with? Sorry for interrupting.
Sure. The Department of Fisheries and the Department of Wildlife Conservation are the 2 that we work predominantly with. But I would say that, this is a relationship that has been built up over several years. It's not something that happened overnight, of course. Both Nishan and myself, the 2 co-founders, we've been working in this field for quite a long time with these various agencies. So even before our organization was set up, we were interacting with these departments. And of course, it presents its challenges. It's not an easy thing to do. Government departments, as you pointed out, have big challenges when it comes to capacity. I think as Dr. Dan pointed out, there is an issue where government agencies are often hesitant to reach out to external parties for advice and support. But I've also seen some changes, I would say, over the last decade where they're a little bit more open than they used to be, which is quite promising and gives us quite a lot of hope. I think overall the situation is slightly improving, but probably not as fast as it should be. And unfortunately, our oceans are deteriorating at a much faster rate than the positive action that's going into it.
Mudita, with Pearl Protectors, I know you regularly organize dive expeditions, organize volunteer groups to clean up ocean plastic, beach cleanups, etc. I want to ask you the same question as well, as more sort of organizing those kinds of programs. In your interactions with the state, have they been receptive to your work or resistant?
Well, I think one of the main challenges the state is facing is there is a lack of capacity and there's a lack of utilizing resources. We understand, if we take few of the agencies, Department of Wildlife Conservation, they are in charge of the entire wildlife. So we have the terrestrial wildlife as well as the marine. But then we see that there's a large percentage of resources allocated for terrestrial wildlife, the conservation, but when it comes to the marine area, we're seeing there's a gap there, and I think there's definitely improvement. Some of the simple examples we see that there's dynamite fishing taking place on the eastern coast. We see on the northwestern side, the southern coast, turtles are being killed, eggs are being poached. It's happening. It has become so normalized. If you go and speak to some of these villagers or like people who are trying to do it commercially, there's no barrier where there's no deterrent because there is a lack of utilizing the resources like enforcing, monitoring these illegal practices, and that has opened so many doors where the marine environment is being impacted. We spoke earlier, being in the ocean, very less eyes are out there, and so some of the enforcing agencies are also the Sri Lankan Navy and then the Coast Guard. Although we have seen recently that both these agencies have been upping their the conservation efforts, there is a lot more that can be done. I think end of the day, it's about understanding as a state, a long-term plan. We spoke of blue economy. We see that globally, small island nations have developed their own sort of blue economy strategy, a long-term strategy. We see our neighbor Maldives, who is benefiting far larger benefits because of the blue economy, facilitation of the blue economy. But in Sri Lanka, it still hasn't happened. So all these things should happen together. If you have a long-term vision, especially if the government at this point, after this economic crisis, if we can develop a long-term strategy to see how we can sustainably harness the ocean resources, at the same time conserving and protecting it, I think there is going to be more incentive for all these departments, agencies, ministries working towards the ocean to work together and allocate, utilize resources so that we can protect this unique marine environment.
Jayanta, actually ahead of the economic crisis, or before the crisis really blew up with the petrol queues and the power cuts, etc., among the first wave of protests against the previous administration actually came from environmentalists and conservationists, the Stop Ecocide protest against deforestation, etc. Do you feel that with the crisis, that public interest in conservation in general and marine environment conservation in particular has declined?
Well, what I would see is that with the crisis, definitely there is this economic hardships that set in, and that people will have better priorities in their opinion, and that their interest in environmental conservation or other associated matters will definitely go down a little. And that is seen in every economic downturn, every recession or any situation similar. Conflict situation is similar. But however, I believe that Sri Lanka somehow kept on, in general, the interest in environmental conservation, at least in terms of public and the other civil society organizations and other actors in the environmental sector. And therefore, I think the interest is still very much there, and public is pushing for it. And the governments are obliged to push for it, because we have the SDGs, CBDs and other targets that we need to meet in terms of our global commitments. Therefore, there is a big interest in it. And like Dan and Mudita mentioned, the blue-green economy is the new thing. Now we have at least 3 different projects under the government, under the Ministry of Environment, looking at blue-green economy pathways. Different overseas consulting groups to local groups that are working on different papers, policies and all of that. And we also have on top of it Global Green Growth Initiative. That's another international effort in terms of looking at how the green growth strategy can be utilized for the development of developing countries and developed countries.
So when you look at like the work that's being done, on the one hand you have the academics, researchers, conservationists, etc., that are putting in this work, coming up with the policy papers, the research, etc. But at the same time, like Daniel mentioned, this is a time bomb that you're dealing with, and the clock is ticking.
Yes.
So there's a need to move very fast. Do you see any kind of action transpiring from these?
That is the exact problem we have. We are working on a lot of things, that there is a huge pressure, internally and from outside, that we need to, especially the countries that we export to, like the European Union. The European Union have various different things coming into the picture, like the new Green Deal by the European Union, and there is so much of sustainability focused requirements that our exporters, the companies, need to fulfill. So there is a huge interest both internally and externally. But going beyond these policies, papers, documents that are coming out, I'll take a classic example. Now, in 2016, we came up with nationally determined commitments after COP21, which is called famously Paris Summit, and that we have different sectors classified, and that has fisheries, separate fisheries sector, and coastal and marine sector. These are 2 key sectors that we need to up our game in terms of achieving the sustainability and various different targets. And we also have Convention on Biodiversity, which according to which by 2030 now we need to achieve 30% of marine protected areas. Whilst right now we have, correct me if I'm wrong, we have roughly about 0.7% of marine protected area. So you can see we need to
So the 30% is marine protected area or
marine and terrestrial both.
marine and terrestrial both?
Minimum.
So
yes.
you're saying 0.7% is only the marine.
Marine, exactly. So
The marine protected area is not supposed to go up to 30%.
No, it is supposed to go up to 30%. It is supposed to go up to 30%. Currently, the terrestrial coverage is fine because we have roughly about 30% of a protected area network in terms of Forest Department, Wildlife Department, and other departments.
Both are supposed to be 30% separately.
Separately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
Now the problem we have in Sri Lanka is that we don't even have 1%. Now, my problem is that the government is working on many different papers, including the President's most ambitious climate prosperity plan, CPP, which looks at becoming carbon neutral now, a more fast-paced carbon neutrality by 2040, which was supposed to be 2050. Now it's 2040. Now, all of these nice documents and work being done, different projects, $1 million projects that are coming from overseas, funded by overseas entities, but in terms of action on the ground, what have we done? Now, for this World Ocean Day, the government had done a lot of things. I'm not criticizing these things, little activities here and there like beach cleanups. That's not what we are expecting from the government. Concrete action. How do we reach 2030 targets while we haven't achieved anything from 2016 to now, almost 8 years later, we are still preparing documents?
Daniel, as far as the oceans are concerned, for Sri Lanka, there's ocean warming, sea level rise, deoxygenation, acidification of the oceans, plastic pollution, unsustainable fishing practices. What is the most pressing issue facing Sri Lanka's waters?
So I would say the biggest issue that we are facing at the moment is probably overfishing. This is an issue that is going to impact both food security for Sri Lanka and fisher livelihoods. We have a lot of overfishing going on in Sri Lanka. We have about, over 50,000 registered fishing vessels operating in the country. They have a very wide range, so they are, of course, not just fishing within Sri Lankan waters, but also beyond in the high seas, occasionally in the waters of other countries as well, illegally. So this is a big issue that has to be tackled. There are a lot of species that are facing incredible population declines within our waters. My focus is actually on sharks and rays, and we have already documented the collapse of a group of fish called the sawfish. These were very popular in the 1990s, commonly encountered, but they're gone now. This is a species that you don't see in our waters any longer.
Are they extinct? No.
They are, from Sri Lankan waters, they are probably extinct. They are not globally extinct yet. There are a few populations in Australia and the US, for example, that are still viable. But in Sri Lanka, they're gone. And it's unlikely that they will be able to replenish either, because it is a coastal species that has limited capacity to move around. So, we are faced with a lot of population decline, which is, as I pointed out, going to impact livelihoods in the long term. And we really need to be transitioning towards sustainable fisheries. And when you think about it, sustainable fisheries is the most obvious thing. Why would we want to fish something unsustainably? But I think as humans, and I think as we discussed previously, it's very difficult to connect with what's happening in the oceans or underwater because we can't see the damage that's happening. And we keep thinking that it is an infinite resource that we can just keep utilizing.
But Daniel, as far as implementing these solutions that you speak of, usually there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So where can we look at as a model case on how these issues of overfishing, as you pointed out, being the most pressing issue that's facing the protection of Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka's ocean is concerned? What's a model case that we can look at to maybe take some pointers on how to do this thing?
I mean, I wish I could give you a very good model, but I think this is a good example of how many countries across the world are struggling. Sri Lanka is not unique in this case. Overfishing, there are many developed countries that have overfished.
Japan.
Yes, Japan, but also Europe, the US. There are certain fish stocks that have been overfished and have completely collapsed. Of course, these countries have recognized those issues and have, put into place a lot of research and management regulations to try and prevent that from occurring in the future. And I think that's where, we are perhaps lacking in Sri Lanka. One of our I think we have a few big issues. One is, as we discussed, the lack of coordination between government agencies. A lot of them are, pursuing different targets independently. And then overall, we are very much reactionary. We are not very proactive. It's only when something happens that we try to make a change. And, we've seen this with Express Pearl. This disaster happened, and then we try to fix it and try to mitigate. And of course, mitigation is important because accidents like this will likely happen in the future. But I think we are also not noticing the day-to-day damage that is occurring in our oceans. I always like to think of the Express Pearl, it's like you have Singharaja forest, which is the equivalent to the ocean, and you have a forest fire. Right? And of course, all of the agencies, the government, you quickly go in there, you try and stop the forest fire. This is your Express Pearl. But at the same time, every single day, you have deforestation occurring, you have logging, you have illegal encroachment. And it's the same on the oceans. You have overfishing, you have all of these other pollutants getting into our ocean. And this is happening on a day-to-day basis. And we only hear about these big incidents.
Where is the gap in enforcement? Because while the existing, let's say, the legal framework might not be perfect, there are laws to tackle practices like dynamite fishing, etc. Where is the gap in enforcement? Why is it not being enforced by the Coast Guard, the Navy, the Marine Environment Protection Authority? Where is the gap?
To some extent, I think, again, it comes down to the lack of coordination and sometimes the lack of awareness of different agencies as to what laws are already in place. Dynamite fishing, though, I think is quite an obvious one. Everybody knows it is illegal. Unfortunately, these activities are often occurring through, political connections in certain cases. Because at the end of the day, if anybody is walking around with a stick of dynamite, you would immediately arrest that person. And it's the same. If a fisher is going out to sea with a stick of dynamite, you arrest them. You don't need to question what they're doing with the dynamite. It's obvious that they're doing something illegal. But we have all of these issues in Sri Lanka where, certain groups are able to get away with things from political connections and corruption. And that is something that has to be tackled. But I think at a bigger level, we are also lacking a lot of regulations and, changes that need to improve the overall management of our marine resources.
Now, Daniel, you're speaking of regulations, if I may, Nadeem. Dr. Dan, we spoke about the Express Pearl incident, and you said, of course, you don't want to comment on the court proceedings. I do understand it's sub judice. But if an incident like the Express Pearl incident happens in the future, say, for example, when the tsunami first hit Sri Lanka, we didn't know what it was. We didn't know what to do. We were running around like headless chickens. Same thing happened with the Express Pearl. I distinctly remember the Minister of Ports also going there and making certain statements that ended up being quite giving the people quite a laugh. But come the next time that a similar incident like the Express Pearl incident takes place here in Sri Lanka, do you think there are regulations, at least a basic standard operating procedure on how this should be dealt with?
Charlene, in my view, regulations come second. Number one comes the policy. We do not have a proper ocean policy or a proper shipping policy.
Then how are we planning on becoming a shipping hub?
Yeah, exactly. That is the real question, that as I have been very I had been talking about these lack of regulations, lack of legislations in our country in meeting these kinds of catastrophes. So even now Express Pearl happened in 2020, New Diamond happened in 2019. What are the laws that we have brought in at least by now? What are the policy changes that we have brought in till now? We do have one contingency plan, which is for the oil, and we could extend it to cover the chemical aftermath, the Express Pearl, or include even the plastic pollution, right? But beyond that, there is nothing. We as a country, we have attempted, I think, 6 or 7 times to bring in a proper ocean and marine policy. which we have yet failed to regularize, legalize. We have to bring it as a regulation. Now, the regulations come second. That's why I said, like, we have to have the policy in place. Now, look at a country like India. India has come to this stage because they do have the policies that were created pretty much earlier, like 30, 40 years ago. And we are still talking about making Colombo Port the maritime hub. We can't make Colombo Port the maritime hub. I have been telling this everywhere. We are still a transshipment hub. Maritime hub I mean, a lot of things surrounding that concept. So we have not developed into those things. Like, for example, Singapore is a maritime hub. We are not. So we have to reach to that level. We can't be just saying that, I mean, okay, Colombo Port is a maritime hub. No, it is not. We have to bring in all these things. Regulations is a must. Number one is the regulation, because regulations without laws, we cannot do.
But like you said before, policy comes first.
Yeah, so policy must come first. The regulations, the laws must come second. Right, and even recently, I was overhearing some comments made by the minister in charge of this particular area, and he was saying that the law alone cannot solve these problems. Of course, but there has to be the law to implement, right? The law cannot solve all these problems, but the law has to be there to implement. Now, what has happened without the proper laws in place in Sri Lanka in relation to the meeting of those incidents that took place recently? Now, your question is, are we ready to face another one? Certainly not. I mean, the way it has come up to now, for the last 3 years and up to now, we have not come up proactively, like Daniel said. The proactive things are very important. I have been telling this even before. We have not come up proactively to prevent any future scenario taking place of this nature. And I'm sure that Mudita also can talk about, because they are doing much work from the Pearl Protectors perspective. I mean, they have seen this practically. Right? Now, I mean, in order to, for example, in order to prevent a pollution damage being occurred, we need to bring in the equipment. Have we brought the equipment after the MT New Diamond and MV Express Pearl? Not really. I mean, okay, we can bring
Dr. Dan,
small things.
we don't have money to hold elections. Do you think we have money to bring down equipment?
Exactly. So then expect the worst in the coming years. If another incident of this nature happen, then please expect the worst.
But we have vehicles money to bring vehicles for parliamentarians.
No, that's one of the prime concerns.
Priorities.
We have a question from one of our viewers, and I think Daniel would be best equipped to answer this question. Can more soil erosion occur if the sea is not protected due to high energies evolving, changing waters, currents, etc.? Could that cause accelerated erosion and tsunami-type waves?
Okay, that's a tough question. It's not my field of expertise, but what I can say is definitely from a global warming perspective, we have an increase in sea level, and that is going to cause significant impacts for small island developing states like Sri Lanka. Coastal erosion is a big issue. We've already seen that in Sri Lanka and many parts of the country. And that is something that's just going to keep getting worse. It's not necessarily going to result in a tsunami, because that is, of course, linked to earthquakes and so on. But of course, climate change has a lot of knock-on effects globally.
But all of these issues are kind of interconnected as well, right? Because if you have like ocean, the heating of the ocean causes the increase in volume, also prevents mixing, which leads to deoxygenation, acidification, etc. And which then also, like you said, these issues have a knock-on effect, therefore contributing to soil erosion as well, to coast erosion.
Yeah, and I think this is why we really need to remember everything on this planet is sort of interconnected, right? Each of the actions that we have has a long-term impact. And I think the worry that I have, with Sri Lanka sort of recovering from this current state that we are in, we are really neglecting the natural environment, whether it's terrestrial or marine. Our focus is purely on how do we recover the economy and how do we continue developing. But that is interlinked with the natural environment. Right? If you look at tourism, tourists are coming to the country to see our national parks and to enjoy our wildlife and to swim in our oceans. As Sri Lankans, we are relying on our oceans for food security and livelihoods. This is all interconnected. We cannot ignore the environment in favor of the economy. And this is where, of course, considerations of the blue-green economy are quite vital, but only if one has a clear plan that not just focuses on exploitation of these environments, but also on the management and protection of these environments.
Now, recently there was a new development of a school of thought that shipping can cause global warming and the rise of the sea level, something that falls within the Paris Protocol, and whether Sri Lanka as a result could obtain compensation from the ships that use our sea. So now when it came to me, I said, now look here, that you need to have the proper causation in place. It's not really the shipping that causes this. The global warming is an issue that is connected to the rise of the sea levels. Now, if you look at a country like Vanuatu near Australia, it is sinking, right? It is not really sinking, but the sea level is rising. Now, the fund that has been created by the Paris Convention, the Paris Protocol, is now looking at compensating the island of Vanuatu because they are losing their island. So likewise, since Sri Lanka is an island, will we be able to claim compensation from such a fund? Is a new thought that has come up. And of course, in law, you need to show up the causation that causes such a rising level of the seawater. So these are something like that, that the blue economy in the future is getting affected because of the climate change.
If I may add also a slightly different perspective to this, if you're looking purely from a biodiversity perspective, we have quite a lot of amazing biodiversity in our waters. But as I said, a lot of this is starting to vanish. And while we certainly need to look into, as you pointed out, these compensations for climate change and all that, and we of course have to keep all of this in mind when we are coming up and developing all our various policies, we also need to keep focus on the day-to-day activities, the direct impacts that we are having on our oceans. Because I always say, my focus is on sharks and rays. And if overnight you get rid of climate change, global warming, plastic pollution, these species are still going extinct, right? And that is something that we have to tackle. Our turtles and all that, a lot of these animals over time might be able to adapt to some extent to climate change. Not that we should ignore that matter, but if we don't protect these animals and manage these animals now, by the time we solve the matters of climate change and bigger issues like plastic pollution and all, these animals will be gone.
Now, Daniel, you brought up the issue of plastic pollution in our oceans. I'd like to pose this question to Mudita now. We speak about these massive measures that we can take to reduce the effects of climate change and somehow try and protect these species and so on and so forth. Let's take a very simple issue as far as plastic pollution is concerned. I was speaking with Daniel about this just a while before the show. As far as, if my memory serves me correctly, there have been at least maybe 5 to 6 instances in the past where Sri Lanka has banned the use of single-use plastic. Right? There have been 5 to 6 times, and it always confuses me when I see it on the headlines of news, saying government bans the single-use.
Or when you're reading the headline, it's
or reading the headlines. I'm always like, wait, it almost feels like deja vu. I think to myself, wait, didn't this happen a few months ago? Didn't this happen a year ago? And leave that aside. You get companies and corporations taking steps to reduce the use of plastic, and now we have I wouldn't want to mention any brand names, but we have our packeted milks that come in these
Paper straws.
yes. Now they're using paper straws, which is a good move. But the paper straw comes in a plastic bag.
So
Is the thinking
yes.
wrong? Is the intention wrong? Is it just a cloud, to show that we're doing something? What's that?
Single-use plastic is one of the most biggest challenges the ocean is facing. What happens is when single-use, the core problem of single-use plastic is that it only is used once and it goes into waste. And Sri Lanka is now addicted to many of these single-use plastics, starting from sachets, like you said, plastic bags, bottles, straws. And here I want to bring in different aspects. One thing is that our addiction has caused the problem where the management of waste has drastically been challenged, where it's about 5 to 8% of our plastic that gets recycled. In most cases, they get either sent out to incineration or ends up in the environment. If you've been to one of the canals, you can see when it rains or on a normal day, tons of plastic goes out. When we dive down, we do this expedition called the Cleaner Seabeds for Sri Lanka. You start crying underwater. It's seeing the reefs just packed with all this plastic. The space that is usually inhabited by marine life, this is their habitat, this is where they breed, it's all packed with single-use plastic bags, sachets, you name it, it's there. Fishing nets, that's also another problem. One of the core problems here is that a lack of awareness and then lack of implementation. Like you mentioned, we've been banning different types of single-use plastic at different times.
So just to, not to stop your train of thought, but do you also feel that it is a socio-economic issue as well? Because the reason that a lot of people are addicted to these single-use plastics, buy the smaller sachets, use the lunch sheets, etc., is low income. So they can't, and the plastic is cheaper, the alternatives are far more expensive.
I want to say this is partially a myth. Taking example of the sachet, the myth that is put out there is because a lot of large population is low income, the sachets is the best way to go ahead. But if you think about it, if you take the scale of economies, you can see that a 10 milliliter or maybe 20 milliliter gram or packet, if you add it up to 100 milliliters, the cost of buying a 100 milliliter item is much lower than buying.
But the problem
is that people don't have that cash in hand at that time, right? Because if someone let's say a day laborer who's hand to mouth pretty much, they're buying
this is
small sachets
very interesting because
time.
we did a survey on this. We went and spoke to some of these consumers. At the same time, we spoke to some of the shopkeepers as well. It's not to say that, yes, there is a larger population that could be living off a daily wage, but the thing is they always subconsciously go to the minimum amount, minimum priced item. But then if you are to be selling, say, 100 milliliter without using sachets, people will automatically go for it. It's subconscious. It's not that they do the calculations.
No, if you take the item off the market, then people will go out of it because they have no alternative. But the thing is,
True.
The thing with justice is that you have to protect the environment, but maybe the gap in enforcement or in implementation of these single-use plastic bans is because while you're enforcing it, you also have to simultaneously look at social upliftment as well.
True. Wealth is one of the main factors. If you think about 2017-16, this was before Easter bombings and the COVID and then the economic crisis. There was, if you see the cost of plastic versus alternatives, you would see that the cost comparison was not drastically different. But then what we saw was all these challenges coming through. During the COVID period, the plastic bag and along with many other items were made mandatory. And that increased the demand for plastic items. And then the import of these alternatives really vanished. And then the local industry that was sort of manufacturing these also sort of dropped out because the price comparison, the demand for single-use plastic kind of flushed out everything else. So it's an externality that we face, unfortunately, but now that the economy is growing, I think what needs to happen is the plastic usage. We are spending close to $1 billion importing plastic per year. At the same time, there is a huge lobby in Sri Lanka that protects these manufacturers, plastic manufacturers. Every time, whenever we saw this, whenever the bans used to come, there's always like, the extended period given. There's always on the headlines.
Number of microns changes.
There was a lot of corruptions going. Exactly, there was a lot of corruption going on, and you can see why that is happening as well. But end of the day, it's about creating demand for alternatives that could really tilt this, and that could benefit not just the socio-economics, but also the environment as well. But finally, the point I wanted to bring up was the EPR system, extended producer responsibility. So far, the Ministry of Environment, along with the CEA, had done a voluntary EPR system, which gave much of the say to many of the corporates to do whatever they want. But recently, they have shifted to making it mandatory, which is very important, which means companies responsible, they will be taking responsibility for the waste. In many countries, in Europe, in other countries, the waste management, the core functionality of the waste management is that corporates, manufacturers do take responsibility. I mean, if we couple all these things together, along with creating awareness and moving to alternatives, 30, 40 years ago, we didn't have plastic. So we still can go back to it and create more local industries that can produce alternatives away from single-use plastic. So if we can all put this together and have a national framework to bring this forward, not having ad hoc, bans coming through, I think that we could really deal with this massive plastic pollution that we are facing. Microplastic is one of the biggest. Sri Lanka has one of the largest microplastics in our waters, and what happens is marine life consume these, and we've now seen that microplastic is everywhere inside our body. So we can easily find solutions, but it's just we need a proper strategy.
Thank you very much, Mudita, for those views. I believe, Nadim, we can wrap up this round and move on to the final round for the closing statements of our panelists. Flipping the table this time, I'd like to start off with Dr. Dan Malaka, the expert, of course, in the law of the sea. Dr. Dan, we spoke a lot about bringing in reforms, and you highlighted the importance of there being a law to be enforced, because there can be no justice without a law. So, Dr. Dan, again, I'd like to pose one of the same questions that I posed to Daniel at the start, and if you could address this maybe in your closing statement. What kind of model are we looking at? Because the wheel need not be reinvented. We've taken, we've taken leaf from many jurisdictions in the world, mainly from the United Kingdom, on most of the legislation that we've passed here in Sri Lanka. So, what kind of laws are you looking forward to being implemented in Sri Lanka as far as the conservation of the ocean is concerned?
It's a very good question, Shalan, because on a topic that is based on the oceans and its conservations, when we mark the World Ocean Day, we need to discuss about the conservative methods, and the laws that we need to bring up is how to prevent pollution of the seas, pollutions of the oceans. Now, the biggest polluter of the oceans and the maritime waters is not what we were discussing before, like the incident involving the Express Pearl or the MV New Diamond or any shipping thing or the other things, but it is the output from the land-based, like what we discussed about plastics, like what we discussed about the nutrients, Vijayantha, and these are the things that really pose more danger to the sea. The land-based pollution is something that most of the countries, like you mentioned, UK, USA, or Sri Lanka, or even Singapore, has not been able to fully implement in order to protect the seas from pollution. So land-based pollution is number one source of pollution of the world, of the world's ocean. So we need to bring in international conventions as well as the local legislations to prevent these types of land-based pollution from occurring. Only actually the London Dumping Convention in 1972 has introduced the anti-dumping measures of the seas, right? Apart from that, there is no proper legislation that has come into being internationally or locally. We do have the Central Environmental Authority, we do have the MIPA, the Marine Environmental Authority, but I would say without any fear that these organizations are like they're toothless protectors of our oceans, like due to the lack of coordination, due to the conflicts in interagency matters, right? There are many aspects. We do not have a one-stop shop for all these activities to come into being in obtaining licenses and attending to the pollution incidents and so forth, like in Singapore. So in Singapore, for example, has the Maritime Authority. We do not have such an authority. Now, you were talking about rather than reinventing the wheel, what measures, what examples can we take from the other world, right? So these are things like we can take use of the Singapore system very easily, since they have developed these areas pretty much, and having a maritime authority is very important in order not only to look after shipping but also with regard to the other areas of protecting the sea. So as I said earlier, the policy must come into place. Then comes the laws. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the laws, we don't have to introduce new laws, but only to make sure that the gaps are filled, right? We do have gaps in the legislation, so we need to fill in the gaps. So we need to revise, we need to see what are the developments that have taken up globally, and also as I told before, we need to concentrate on the conservation and mainly eliminating the land-based pollution, that we are polluting the sea very much greater than any other source of marine pollution.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan Malika, expert in the law of sea. We now move on to Mudita Katuwavala, the coordinator of the Pearl Protectors. Mudita, you've been fighting to protect the ocean for many, many years. And you might be having a reading of how things will be in the future. So based on what has happened and what is happening in Sri Lanka right now, is it a more positive outlook or a more negative outlook as far as Sri Lanka's future or the future of Sri Lanka's oceans are concerned? Your time starts now.
No, I think, here's the thing, there is a lot of negativity. I'll take a few examples. Right now, Viditalatiu Nature Reserve is being degazetted. Parts of it has been in the process of being degazetted. We are talking about hypocrisy here, because we are talking about, as a government, bringing in climate action, being one of the pinnacles to taking climate action in the world, setting up a university, climate action university, but then at the same time, one of the third largest mangrove reserve in Sri Lanka is being subjected to being degazetted. 29,000 hectares of this natural reserve is rich with biodiversity, and it is a carbon sequestration. If you take 1 hectare, it has the capacity to sequester close to 1,000 metric tons of carbon within 25 years. And we are in the process of removing these protected areas, possibly for aquaculture, unsustainable aquaculture. We know that in cases from Negombo, Chilau, we've seen these aquaculture companies setting it up 5-6 years into it, with all these wastewater heading back into the environment. It has decimated, destroyed so much of our environment. In the south, we are seeing this whale watching, which is swimming with whales. We've seen how these unregulated practices are going without any sort of monitoring, and some of these people are making so much of money by stressing out the whales that are in our waters. This season, only about 4 blue whales have been seen in Sirasa. So all these, also recently we reported to one of the police stations where a tourist was using a spearfishing gun, which is illegal in Sri Lanka. But when you speak to the police, they are like, oh, we didn't even know that it was illegal. So there is a lot of space for improvement in Sri Lanka when it comes to ocean conservation and protection. And at the same time, we are seeing a lot of positivity. There's a lot of young people. 5-10 years ago, when you talk about environment, it was always about the wildlife, the trees, but now it's about the ocean. A lot of people, young people are coming and asking, how do you get your diving license? Why, when you ask, why do you want to get your diving license? Oh, I want to protect the ocean. I want to go down and do what you all are doing, removing this waste, removing these nets, so that we can give back life to these reefs. So that is definitely positivity that we are seeing. And I think the younger generation is very much understanding of the marine impact that we are facing. And I feel like if we collectively, all these organizations, the research organizations, the youth organizations, conservation organizations, all come together, really work out, support both in creating awareness, at the same time supporting these government initiatives, facilitating government to really to really initiate having a proper long-term policy towards protecting our ocean. So I think if we can really put effort into it, I think we can be celebrating a much happier Ocean Day in the future. But at this point, it's not very good.
Thank you very much, Muditha Katuwavala, coordinator of the Peril Protectors. Quite optimistic you are about the future, and I think that's a good way to go, because if we don't have hope, then what do we have? So thank you very much for those views. We now move our attention to Jayantha Vijayasinghe, a conservationist. Jayantha, in your closing statement, I'd like if you could highlight maybe how conservationists could better work with the government, because as it stands, it almost seems as if you're on two sides fighting against each other instead of fighting the problem together. So given the fact that you're a conservationist and you're working with other conservationists and also have certain interactions with the government, what do you think would be a better way to move forward and maybe even, remove this label that the government always uses on conservationists and people and activists, mostly the label of NGO Karyo?
Yeah.
Your time starts now.
Well, I think with the increased enthusiasm and the government having to go for these international commitments, I think there is a huge space for conservationists, public, activists, civil society, and all these organizations to basically work with the government. Not only working with the government, but also working with other parties such as the corporates. And Dan mentioned about shipping industry and a slight different opinion about whether the shipping industry, how shipping industry is altogether contributing to global warming or the emissions. I believe that 3% of entire global emissions are also from the shipping industry. Similarly, if you look at the pollution caused by, the marine pollution caused by the shipping companies, and there is a huge space there where we can work with the government, institutions, and also the corporates as well. And you also mentioned earlier about this greenwashing, blue washing, like a lot of things going on now in the space of marine conservation in terms of one of the most polluting companies in the country claiming that they are recovering 80% of their plastics in an attempt to greenwash or blue wash their operations. So these are things that the the people, public need to be wary of as well, because plastic pollution is a huge issue for ocean, and microplastic and other pollutants being in the ocean impacts the biodiversity in the ocean. And working with the government, I think we need to, it has to be an approach where we work with the government and also work against the government when it comes to distress moments like Veditaltiv. Veditaltiv, like he mentioned, we don't even know. The gazette is out, but the extent that was gazetted is not known. Now, in that is itself, technically the gazette is invalid. Not only that, if a wildlife nature reserve has to be degazetted, Dan would know better that it has to go through the parliament. It's not like a forest area that is being degazetted. You can degazette, the minister can degazette a forest area anytime.
There was a time when the Pradesh Sabha, the provincial council secretary could have degazetted it.
Exactly. But now it is like also Mudita mentioned, the hypocrisy is seen here very much, because we speak of climate prosperity plan, we speak of a lot of things, we speak of a climate change act, all that, but however we find that degazetting of very important marine protected areas, nature reserves, and mangrove systems, these are all intact in this one particular location in Veditaltiv is happening. So what I would say is that that there is more space, like you mentioned, but however it has to be different interest groups with different strategies must work with the government and also work against the government, and that is only that is the only way that we could probably drive the government towards action and being honest about its commitments.
Thank you very much, Jayantha Vijay Singha, a conservationist. And finally, we have Daniel Fernando, Director of Blue Resources Trust. Daniel, you're in the business you're in a business here in Sri Lanka that's what can I say? It's not seen a lot in Sri Lanka, not given too much prominence, and is underplayed a lot. Research and development budgets, at least in foreign countries, for various other matters, far exceed many other budgetary allocations that they have, simply for the reason because research and development is how a country can move forward. So with the many challenges that you are facing in this research and development and coming up with policies, what's your projection on how Sri Lanka would fare in the future, given the current manner in which the government is functioning and the people are really responding to what's happening here on the land and also to our oceans?
That's a tough one. Very simply, I think the future is not looking very positive at the moment.
You're not as optimistic as Mudita.
I will talk a bit more about the optimistic side that I have in a moment, but I think we have to be very realistic about where we are. We've discussed this quite a lot. It is a ticking time bomb, and if we don't act now, it will be too late. And unfortunately, the government is not always prioritizing the oceans or biodiversity overall sufficiently. I mean, we've discussed the whole issue of Veditaltiv as well. And, it's clear that the focus of the government is elsewhere. And the same applies when we're looking, at funding allocated towards marine research. As an organization, as a non-profit organization operating in Sri Lanka, we don't receive any benefits from the government at all. We have to apply for our own research grants internationally and secure our own funds in order to be able to conduct the research that we do here. But of course, these are issues that we have to figure out for ourselves. And I think there is this shift in mindset in Sri Lanka where I think overall, the people of Sri Lanka are becoming a lot more engaged with the oceans. And I think that in itself is incredibly positive. There are lots of opportunities from a political perspective. For instance, the High Seas Treaty, which has, opened up for signature and ratification. I think Sri Lanka as a country should really be looking towards signing and ratifying such treaties in order to have a say in what's happening in the oceans around our country. There are a few positive stories which I would certainly like to highlight. For instance, the Department of Fisheries have taken a lot of initiative to increase the management of fishery resources in the country. So they've actually developed a mechanism to designate sort of fishery management areas at a district level across the country. And if that order were to be signed by the minister, that would dramatically increase the protection and management of our fishery resources across the country, which I see as being one of the number one issues that we have. So I would say those are the two big opportunities we have from a policy perspective, but also as individuals. I think many of the viewers listening to this show might feel a bit discouraged about all of the big sort of global issues we've been discussing today, and might think, how can I as an individual make a difference? And it's not easy, but it is something that every single person can do. There are very simple steps. We discussed, single-use plastics. When you go to a supermarket, don't take a plastic bag. Take your own reusable bag. It's a very simple step, but still many people do not think about that. When you're consuming bottles, soda bottles, whether it's the famous brands or not, instead of using plastic, you can actually purchase glass bottles, at your local small, tiny caddies, and that's benefiting these small, income individuals rather than larger, grocery chains that we have across the country. So there are these alternatives that we can look at, and also from a seafood perspective, as individuals, we need to be a bit more mindful about the seafood that we are consuming. We like to just see the seafood on our plate, but not really think about where it's coming from, how it has been fished, and how it has actually arrived on the plate. And I always say, if as individuals we all make a conscious decision to reduce our seafood consumption by half, if every single person did that, you would reduce the pressure on the marine environment quite significantly. But in order to do that, we have to be also willing to pay a higher amount of money. So we should be accepting of the fact that we have to pay more for our seafood in order to ensure that it is sustainable. And of course, this is not something that every single person can do, but we also must accept the fact that there are many people with privilege in the country. There are many individuals who will happily go and spend a lot of money eating out or going to a 5-star hotel and having a meal, and you will not think twice about where your seafood has come from. Whereas if you make that conscious effort to start asking, where is our seafood coming from? Is it sustainable or not? These little changes can make a big difference. And by growing these economies and these industries in a more sustainable manner, that in itself will drive, of course, more funding towards the government. And hopefully then in turn, they will recognize the value of these marine, of the ocean, and hopefully also put a lot more money back into the oceans where it is really needed.
Thank you very much, Daniel Fernando, Director of Blue Resources Trust. Also, thank you very much, Jayantha Vijay Singha. Thank you very much, Mudita Katuwawala, Coordinator of the Pearl Protectors. And thank you very much, Dr. Dan Malika, for joining us on our program this evening. Thank you very much, Nadim Majid, for asking all the right questions. And thank you to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of Face the Nation. We will see you again, same time, same place, next week. Until then, take care and God bless.